Hello, it's Adam in the studio, and the first of the stories that we're going to cover that we thought went a bit under the radar this week was the ruling by the coroner in the case of Ruth Perry. She was the head teacher from Caversham Primary School in Reading who took her own life at the start of the year after she received an inadequate rating from Ofsted, the school inspectors, for her primary school. And the coroner delivered their ruling on Thursday, and Heidi Connor, that's her name, ruled that the Ofsted inspection contributed to Ruth Perry's death. Well, we can talk about it now because we're joined by the BBC's education editor and very good friend of the podcast, Bramman Jeffries. Hi, Bramman.
Hello there.
Also here in the studio with me is Professor Alice Bradbury, who is Professor of Sociology of Education at the UCL Institute of Education. That's a lot of educations in your title, isn't it, Alice?
It is indeed. I'm quite education focused.
And also you did this report called Beyond Ofsted. Who was that for?
So it was for the Beyond Ofsted inquiry, which was funded by the NEU but independently done.
The National Education Union.
The National Education Union.
And when did you do that?
Well, the report came out last week.
Right. I thought it was further back than that, but it's actually still fresh out the oven. And also joining us on the line is Vic Goddard, who is CEO of Passmore Cooperative, which is an academy trust of 5 schools. Hi, Vic.
Hi.
Are you wearing a Christmas suit?
It's Christmas jumper day at Passmore's today, and I'm a head teacher, so I don't wear jumpers, I wear suits. So I have a full 3-piece trouser, jacket and tie combo of Christmas stuff. It's 100% polyester, no naked flames required.
Yes, please be careful. Right, okay. I mean, that's probably like the last fun bit we really get to discuss in this subject because it's quite a sad story. But Bramman, do you just want to remind us of the background and why we're talking about Ruth Perry?
So in November last year, Ofsted visited to inspect Caversham Primary School, a small primary school in Reading, in a very leafy part of the city, which had been outstanding since it was last inspected in 2009. On the first morning of the inspection, the lead inspector started raising concerns about the way they kept records around keeping children safe, sometimes called safeguarding, and the checks on staff. And Ruth Perry knew that if they were judged ineffective on just that one measure, no matter how good everything else was, that the whole school would be judged inadequate. And she left that meeting incredibly distressed, became more distressed over the 2 days of the inspection as it became clear that was indeed the judgment that they were going to make. And then over the following 2 months, her mental state deteriorated considerably. This was someone described by colleagues and friends as resilient, tough, capable, highly successful. But she could not see beyond the fact that this judgment would mean the end of her career. And on the 8th of January this year, while waiting for that report to be published, knowing the judgment and fearing the shame and humiliation that would bring in the local community where she had grown up, and in fact, of course, she'd gone to Caversham Primary School, she took her own life.
And Bramman, for the last couple of weeks, you've been listening to the evidence at the inquest, and then we got the coroner's ruling yesterday. What did the coroner say? The
coroner gave a lengthy narrative verdict, and I'll come to 2 or 3 of her key points in a moment. But the overall verdict was suicide contributed to by an Ofsted inspection in 2022. This is highly significant. It's the first time that Ofsted have been called as an interested party to an inquest which examines the facts around a death, and it links directly several factors in the inspection to Ruth Perry's death. Those factors were how it was carried out. The senior coroner for Berkshire, Heidi Connor, said it lacked fairness, respect and sensitivity. She said at times it had been rude and intimidating. The inquest had heard evidence about the behaviour of the lead inspector from several people at the school. And she said the fact that Ruth Perry could not tell anyone, even once she'd seen the draft report, that came with a really strict confidentiality warning across the top, so she couldn't tell family, and nor could she tell the mental health professionals that she was subsequently in contact with. Within a couple of days of the inspection being carried out, her husband was so worried about her state of mind that he drove her to a hospital where a mental health crisis team was based. They were turned away because she had to go to her GP first, saw her GP, who immediately referred her back. Her GP told the inquest he had no doubt that the inspection contributed both to her deteriorating state of mind and ultimately to her death.
And Bradman, I know you've been speaking to her sister, and we'll hear some bits of that interview in a moment. But Alice, I mean, that catalogue of issues with Ofsted inspections, does that remind you of you doing your own report into how Ofsted inspections work?
Oh, absolutely. So there have been long-standing concerns about Ofsted. You know, Ofsted has always been a stressful thing. I remember when I was a teacher in the 2000s, we were stressed about Ofsted. But certainly in the last 10 years or so, there's been a real feeling that the fear has really ramped up. And the stakes have become really, really high, particularly for head teachers, because often their whole career is dependent on an Ofsted grade. And as Bramwell was saying, it can be just one part of the inspection. If it's safeguarding, you get what we call a limiting judgment, which means that then the whole school ends up being branded inadequate. And obviously,
in other words, you could have amazing, out of this world teaching, but if you fall down on safeguarding, you're going to be inadequate.
Exactly. And then obviously people often fear that their school will become an academy. They may lose their jobs. It is a really high stakes thing for head teachers. And people have made this analogy. It's like being a football manager. You know, one bad set of results and you lose your job. But actually, it's in a funny way, it's worse because there's just one match and you don't know when that match is going to be. And everything rides on that one Ofsted inspection. You don't know when it's going to come. So you're living in a constant state of fear. Every Monday and every Tuesday and Wednesday. By Thursday, you know they're not coming this week, so you can relax and focus on your school. But that kind of fear, which was highlighted in the coroner's report, is certainly something we see in research. Unfortunately, the Ruth Perry case, which is obviously incredibly tragic, it isn't an isolated case in terms of the effect on head teachers' mental health. All of those concerns have been around for a number of years amongst head teacher groups about that disproportionate impact.
But I'm sure successive education secretaries who invented this system and then tweaked it and allowed it to function didn't intend for it to be like this hideous process. So how did it end up like this?
Well, I think partly it's because of the consequences of Ofsted inspections now that they're so significant. The simplicity of the one-word grade that you get good or outstanding or requires improvement or inadequate, I think is seen as a particularly kind of brutal way of judging a school. And also the fact that there's this sort of short notice, they arrive, it's a relatively short visit. There are concerns about the expertise of the inspectors. So sometimes people feel that they're not being fairly treated. And certainly in our research, we found very few teachers who thought that their Ofsted grade was actually a fair judgment on their school. So all of those things have sort of contributed to this kind of culture of fear.
So Vic, give me the view then from the front line of what it's like when the inspectors come to town.
You know, it's not just about when they come to town, it's about the whole cycle. I'm fortunate that I get asked to work with leaders in different areas. And so one of the things there's a slide that I used to use that I've had to change, which is called the Ofsted Cycle of Courageousness, I've named it. And basically, if you've just had your Ofsted and you got a good, I use this picture of a person sitting in their office with their feet on their desk smoking a cigar. And then when you're a couple of years away from it, you start to look over your shoulder because it's coming. And, you know, I did a picture of somebody looking over their shoulder. And the third picture was when you're in the window, how does it feel? And it used to be a picture of somebody standing on the edge of a cliff. And of course, I had to stop using that. And the last thing I did, I just put a red X there and, you know, said to people, obviously you can't use that slide anymore in the way I did. It makes you ill. You know, I remember, so we're now in the window for lots of the schools in my trust are in the window. Passmore's, which is the school I was head at for many years, is in the window. I remember the last time 5 years ago, and it made me ill. I sat at my kitchen table looking at the numbers on a page, knowing the reality of those numbers, knowing how hard we've worked, knowing how hard the children work, knowing that we're throwing things at it, but also knowing that somebody will arbitrarily tell me they're not good enough. Because there are certain subjects that help you up the league table and help you boost your scores. And if you're unwilling to do those because you don't think it serves your community, then your scores are going to be lower.
Oh, such as what?
So you'll have heard them trying to throw away how vocational qualifications aren't worth it. So let me use an example. City and Guilds. Now, City and Guilds was the gold standard for going into the construction industry. You know, you do your City and Guilds and you build up. So we were able to deliver City and Guilds, but they don't count for us. They really count for the children, though. And so that'll help them get a job. So we have a system that's making me choose between what's right for the child and what's right for the accountability system.
So Vic has raised one of the absolutely key debates around how Ofsted has worked over the last 10 years, which is it's really focused on the range of subjects and how many of the traditional academic subjects children are studying. And if you go a different path, you can be judged badly for that. I've made a documentary about the Ruth Perry story called Death of a Head, which is on the iPlayer, so if people want to watch it there. And for that, I spoke to Sir Michael Wilshaw, who was the last Chief Inspector of Schools. And that's one of the concerns that he raised, amongst many. I mean, he thinks the single word judgment should go. He thinks safeguarding should be done by someone else, and much more regularly in the way that we heard from Alice. But he also thinks you have to look, we have so much data now about how schools perform, information that we did not have 30 years ago when Ofsted was set up. And if you look at, for example, at how much progress children make in secondary school, which we can really measure now, he feels that that is a fairer and more exacting and actually a more level playing field for schools and communities where many people may go into work rather than necessarily go on to university.
And Bramwyn, tell me about your interview with Ruth Perry's sister.
I sat down with Julia Waters yesterday afternoon, and I've been in touch with her since she first spoke out in March. It's been a very long 11 months for the family because all the way along, Ofsted have insisted there was no connection. And more than that, just days before the inquest, Amanda Spielman, in a BBC interview, said that this case had been used to pivot into discrediting Ofsted, something for which they got rebuked at the beginning by the coroner. So I wanted to know from Julia Waters, what does it mean to her that Ofsted has now been listed as the contributing factor in the death of her sister?
It feels like a kind of release that, you know, all through these last horrible 11 months, as well as trying to grieve, we've been kind of battling to make sure it can't happen again. And whilst we have had the ear of the Secretary of State for Education and various people in the DFE, the Ofsted themselves have just absolutely, repeatedly, categorically refused to acknowledge that anything went wrong. So there's this relief and release, if you like, that finally there is an official public recognition of what we've been saying all along.
And of course, Julia Waters has had multiple meetings with both the Secretary of State, Gillian Keegan, but also with officials at the Department for Education. She really wants this to bring about broader change. So I asked her what was the most important thing that she wants to see changed now.
Well, something that can be done straight away that would make things much better is to get rid of the single word judgment. Because that really is, as the coroner reflected, such an inaccurate and misleading way of judging a school. It isn't helpful for parents, and it can't even begin to capture the sort of nuance of a complex organisation like a school.
Vic, so much of this is about the mental health and the support available to teachers and school leaders. If you were really feeling it and you needed help, is there somewhere that you could go that isn't just your GP or 111?
And as I said, 5 years ago, that was me. And I did go to my GP, and the thought that my GP had to ask me if I'd ever thought of hurting myself because of the stress of work. Hearing the stuff from Ruth and her family is just heartbreaking. It makes me so sad, and it makes me so angry that people are put in that position. And for the Ofsted to put out the response to the coroner's verdict yesterday, they did, just saying, yeah, but, it's just not good enough.
Were you ever tempted to pack it in, the job?
Oh, every day at some points, every day. When you're in that window and all you're doing is sitting there waiting for the executioners to come along, is it worth it? My wife has said that to me in the past. Why are you doing it?
Alice, give us some advice then for how this whole process could be reformed.
Well, one of the things that we've said as a result of the Beyond Ofsted inquiry is that, first of all, we would separate out safeguarding from the quality of education judgment. So you would do safeguarding more frequently, and it would be an entirely separate process. Safeguarding is clearly really important, and it needs to be done more frequently than Ofsted is. It can be only every few years. So you separate that out, and that allows you to do both of those jobs well, because you can then judge the quality of education. We also say there should be an immediate pause, that actually the damage being done is so significant that there should be an immediate moratorium on inspections, on routine inspections. Then we put forward a number of proposals for how you can reform the system, particularly based around the idea that you would reduce the sort of level of distrust on which the whole system is based. You would instead have a lot more focus for Ofsted on inspecting school groups, so the multi-academy trusts and the local authorities. And that the whole sort of principle behind our reforms that we're suggesting is really to try to make the system work as a process of school improvement, which is one of the things that seems to currently be a bit missing. Is
less judgy, more kind of like here's
exactly
how the process for getting better.
Yes, because one of the things that when we talk to heads, they said again and again, the best thing we have is someone who knows us, who works with us over time, understands our school, and they can use our sort of self-evaluation and work with us to make the school better, because in the end the whole process is there to ensure that the schools are working well, rather than to create this kind of culture of fear.
Vic, would you sign up to that alternative Ofsted?
Yeah, well, 100%. The issue is that weighing the pig doesn't make it heavier. We've got to feed the pig the right stuff, and the only way to do that is to increase the knowledge base that I have in my school of how to do things better. And so somebody coming and telling me you're not doing it good enough doesn't help. I know that. I'm in this school every day fighting those battles. So it's got to be about improvement, not about just accountability.
I think there's this perception that parents want a one-word judgment, but actually choosing a school is a far more complicated process, and parents can cope with more than one word. We don't need it to be that simple. Actually, we really want to get to know the school, and one of the suggestions for having a kind of broader amount of information out there on a report card style, information that comes out instead of an Ofsted report, is that actually you would give parents the information that they want, which was more nuanced, more sophisticated than simply saying good or inadequate.
I'm going to say thanks to you all. Thank you very much, Professor Bradbury.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to you too, Branwen.
Thank you.
And thanks to you too, Vic.
Thank you.
Well, we asked Ofsted for an interview to respond to all of those points that people were making, but no one was available. Instead, they pointed us to this statement from their chief executive, which was made on Thursday after the inquest. It said, "Ruth Perry's death was a tragedy that deeply affected many people. My thoughts remain with her family, the wider Caversham school community, and everyone else who knew and loved her. On behalf of Ofsted, I would like to say sorry to them for the distress that Mrs. Perry undoubtedly experienced as a result of our inspection. After Mrs. Perry's death, we made changes to the way we work to help reduce the pressure felt by school leaders. We will do more. The coroner highlighted a number of areas of concern. We will work hard to address each of these as soon as we can, and we are starting that work straight away." So that was the statement from the chief executive of Ofsted.